We would draw, we would paint, we would sing when we have big events in our lives. And it helps us heal, it helps us face challenges, and it helps us innovate. And so we wanted to bring that and craft a whole experience, a whole journey around the sacred creativity. Welcome to a truly mesmerizing episode of the Leadershipedelics podcast that's bound to captivate your senses. Today we're thrilled to have Kasia, the exceptional host of the Nourish podcast, as our guest host, exploring the enchanting Sacred Creativity Retreat in the breathtaking Sacred Valley of Peru. Discover the intricate process of bringing together our exceptional guests, the meticulous preparation, integration, and the life-altering experiences of the retreat itself. Unravel the mysteries of brain mapping and uncover the profound lessons that transform lives. For our viewers, get ready to be transported to the retreat itself through captivating visuals. So buckle up, let your curiosity soar, and immerse yourself in this unforgettable adventure. Welcome to Leadershipedelics, everyone. Today we have Kasia from the Nourish podcast. So Kasia is a dear friend of mine. She's a health and wellness entrepreneur. And I asked her to join the show because she's an awesome host, and I wanted to talk about the Sacred Creativity Retreat. So welcome, Kasia. This is your show, and I'll let you take it from here.
Well, Sebastien, I am so honored and so excited to be here. And selfishly, I will say that I feel like this is a solid win, I think, for the audience, but also for me, because I was already ready to pick your brain for about a couple of hours on the topic of this retreat. So it's a win-win. We get to share it with everybody. I love it.
Thank you.
All right. So since, as you mentioned, I am a host myself, this might be slightly different than some of your episodes, but there is a question that I love to bring for each and every single one of my own guests on the Nourish podcast. And I want to ask you, and this is going to be interesting because you've already answered this. So I'm going to be curious to see how it's evolved since I hosted you on the Nourish podcast. And that is, what are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
I don't know. I don't remember what I answered last time, but I think I answered authenticity, creativity, and love. Maybe that changed a little bit. Was that consistent?
It was. The love was definitely consistent, and I think creativity, but the authenticity bit, I think, is interesting because I don't think that's the word you chose last time.
Oh, okay. And it's evolved. It's evolved as well, because I think when we last talked, I don't know when that was, but it was closer to when I left Microsoft. And I think I was suffering from what I would call one-dimensional authenticity. It's like the pendulum had swung the other way from, my corporate self to my spiritual self. And in the last year, it's turned into that multidimensional authenticity. And I think for me, 2023 is really about embracing all that, my whole self. So I'm really excited about exploring all that.
Oh my gosh. I love, love, love that word. And although we have a lot to get into with the retreat, I do want to pause here, and I'd like to invite you to define that for us, because for a lot of people, I mean, maybe some people understand what you're talking about, but for a lot of people, I think the notion of one-dimensional authenticity versus multidimensional can be a foreign concept. And like, we all recognize that there are, I guess, multiple parts to ourselves, but what does it mean to be showing up in like a one-dimensional way?
I think it's being able to harmonize all those parts and also make peace with some of the parts you have and acknowledge them as well. There's a book called the Symphony of Selves that talks about that, and I love the title because for me it says it all. But it's about harmonizing all those parts together and acknowledging that you are the sum of those parts. And a lot of time what happens is when we're in really intense situations that demand a need from one of our parts, we become that part. We become that product manager, program manager, and we go all in. And what happens as a result of that is sometimes the other parts are starving. and when they're starving, eventually they rise up and they push you the other way, and you think you're coming out of the closet and you're letting those parts out, and the pendulum swings the other way. And this is what happened to me. And eventually I realized, I was like, no, like, I don't want to demonize those other parts that were a crucial part of my life for like 25 years. I want to make a friend with them. I want to acknowledge them and see the beauty that comes out of that. There's also a great book called "There's No Bad Parts" by the guy who I think Richard Schwartz, who started IFS, which is Internal Family Systems, and that talks about actually working with the different parts within. Also, a great book on the subject.
Oof, that is juicy. I'm definitely going to look up that book. And, a lot of what you shared, I can so deeply resonate with. And I wrote down as you were speaking the word like war zone, because I remember when I was working at Microsoft with you, by the way, back in the day.
Yep.
I would kind of go into this like zone personally, right? Where it was like the workday and I was just sucked into the meetings, the back-to-back, the urgency, the state of like almost like fight or flight, but it was this different shift in my brain. And reconciling the two actually took me a really long time as well. Even after I left, like I transitioned to study traditional Chinese medicine. Now I'm building my own business. But at the time that I was studying Chinese medicine, I remember that I approached it with the same intensity, which is like filling up my days, nonstop, like to-do list. And it was such an interesting observation because I had blamed so much of that kind of, I guess, singular or one-dimensional existence on the fact that I was in corporate America at the time, right? And that it required that, right? And I would go and show up like that Monday through Friday and then go on a retreat, maybe a one-day retreat, maybe a longer one, which we're going to get into, and then be a completely different human being. And I was like, well, which one is me? Like, how can I bring both? And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're able to actually reconcile and have both show up day to day. Is that true?
Yeah. And I think it's work. It's work to recognize that, because I think we have a tendency to externalize some of those parts, or say, like you were saying, which one am I? And it's like you're the sum of all of them. Now, maybe some of them need to calm down a little bit because they've been overworked and they've been, even with trauma. Like when you talk about trauma, like some of those parts are required to protect you for like periods of your life, but later on in life they might not be as necessary, though they might still be useful in certain situations. So I think developing that awareness of all those parts and how to use their quality and their strength as you move forward is really important.
I love that. And it's a really good segue into one of the ways that people can do that. And that is really through retreats. And there are many different kinds, but I absolutely adored the theme of your retreat. So can you start with kind of sharing with us what was the overall theme? The title of the retreat was called Sacred Creativity, but really what was the theme and what were you kind of organizing as you were crafting this together?
Yeah, it actually started as Sacred Plant Medicine and Creativity Retreat, but it was a mouthful. And eventually, for marketing reasons, we boiled it down to the essence of what we were doing, which was the Sacred Creativity Retreat. And I had been working with a team for several years, and we were doing like plant medicine retreats, like ayahuasca retreats in Peru. And it was what I would call not the generic, but the traditional ayahuasca retreat. You go down to Peru, you do 3 or 4 ceremonies, and then you have some epiphany, and then you integrate those back when you return to the States or wherever you come from. But one night I was reflecting on our work with a friend of mine, and she's a super talented artist. Her name is Kunti Trero. She's this wonderful Mexican medicine woman. She's a singer, a painter, an artist. But you could only see some of her parts during the retreat because, she was working with guests on helping them heal. She was assisting them through ceremonies. And so we were talking, and again, it actually goes back to what we talked at the beginning of like, wow, wouldn't it be awesome if we could create a retreat actually for us first, where we could be our whole selves when helping the guests, where we could bring that creativity that we have to help them. And that was before COVID, and then COVID happened, and my friend Kunti reached out to me, and she was like, well, maybe we should do a retreat together again. And so that's when the Sacred Creativity came in the picture. We're like, yeah, we've been talking about this for a while. Let's use creativity to help people, to empower them, to heal. It's been a huge part in my journey. It was a huge part in Kunti's journey. We would draw, we would paint, we would sing when we have big events in our lives. And it helps us heal. It helps us face challenges, and it helps us innovate. And so we wanted to bring that and craft her whole experience, a whole journey around the Sacred Creativity.
Oof, that is juicy. There's an element that's coming to mind around the repressed part of ourselves, because, as children, we grow up just innately creative, right? And there's just a lot of incredible research that just shows how creativity declines as you age. And that's a really heartbreaking thing because creativity helps us relate to other people. It helps us innovate, as you mentioned. And so I love this theme. I'm curious about the element of plant medicine. And I think a lot of people probably listening to this podcast maybe have some familiarity with plant medicine and what a retreat encompasses, which it sounds like that's the foundation of the Sacred Creativity Retreat, layered on with these additional beautiful themes. So could you actually start by sharing a bit about what these kind of plant ceremony retreats typically look like? Because you mentioned that you had attended several of them, maybe even co-led some of them. Yeah. And just to kind of set the framework, because I'm going to guess that myself included, there are probably a lot of misconceptions about what happens, and also, do you go in with a goal? Let's start there. Is there a goal? Are we striving when we get there? Okay. Because you're integrating all the stuff.
There's a lot to all this. I mean, the plant medicines that we're using are psychedelics. They're using a molecule. They're using ayahuasca, which is a brew that comes from the Amazon forest that's been used by healers for, some people say thousands of years. It's used in conjunction with music, and it can help heal a lot of things. It can help break patterns that people are stuck in, patterns created from trauma, patterns that might lead to addiction. Or blockages that people have within. Some people say it even treats cancer, but there's a lot of of research that needs to be there, and I wouldn't make that claim myself. But I've seen firsthand results on the positive effects of ayahuasca and plant medicine. So we use ayahuasca. We use also psychedelic mushrooms in our retreats, but we also have ceremonies that don't involve any plant medicine per se. We do a sweat lodge ceremony, which is really intense, has a lot of prayer and reflection, and helps us connect to ancestors and family members and so on. So there's a whole program to help people kind of break patterns, and also look at things that happened in the past with different eyes, different perspective, which is also really, really important. So plant medicine is one of the tools that we used during the retreat, and there's a lot of options for plant medicine retreats. I mean, people can go to Costa Rica, Netherlands, Portugal. Peru, of course. There's a lot of plant medicine ceremonies in the US that happen under kind of the Religious Protection Act. So through the Native American Church, there's also the Santo Daime Church, and there's more underground availability as well that is kind of everywhere. So, and more studies are coming out talking about the benefits of psychedelics and plant medicine. But at the same time, it's not just about the substance that people take. It's really about the whole, what they call set and setting, the whole program, and how you prepare yourself for those ceremonies, for those experiences. And that's when it's really important to do your research and to understand, like, how am I going to show up in those ceremonies? Am I going to be, I don't know, if you've got drinking problems, am I going to be drinking up until the ceremony? Am I, or am I going to do an effort to show up in a more clean way and more disciplined way, so I can actually put in the work before, during, and after? So there's a lot there, and I could talk for a long time about.
No, I think that set a really good context, and I do just want to add that from the perspective of Chinese medicine, stagnation is the root of a lot of the diseases out there. And stagnation can be like energetic, it can be physical. You can think of something like a heart attack, which is due to a blockage in the heart, right? Like it's really due to some sort of stagnation. And so I actually love that you brought up the topic of the connection between stagnation and disease. Like there are a lot of cultures and a lot of medicines that have a history in really seeing it from that point of view. And I think as a society, we kind of, not everybody, but there's this kind of general tone where just stuff it down, right? Like don't cry it out. Don't release the feelings, the emotions, the stress. It's all bottled up. And that really does have an effect. Like the energy, when it stagnates, it doesn't just go away. Like it actually is stuck there. So I think that's an important point that you just made.
Yeah, it's hard to let it out sometimes. And ayahuasca definitely has this purging process that people talk about. It's either through like vomiting or other ways. But it's actually a really important part of the process where you're letting that energy that's been stagnating within you out. And because there's a physical process that happens, it makes it like even more meaningful, more lasting. Is like, wow, I finally got rid of those demons. So that's a really big part of the work that happens.
A very terrifying part too, I would imagine.
It's not. It actually, when you're in that state and that work, it just happens. Like there's no, like a lot of people have stigma and preconception about like vomiting or throwing up from like past experiences that didn't, where it was an uncomfortable thing. But I personally, I haven't done it myself, even though I've done a lot of ceremonies. I use breath work to purge, but most people who have, I go clean up their purge buckets during the ceremony, and I talk to them afterward, and they're like, no, I mean, this was like a very therapeutic experience for me to go through that. And it didn't feel painful. It's a completely different experience. Like, if you drink a lot and you throw up, it's more painful than that, from what I've been told.
Well, I think that's a very interesting perspective. It's a powerful reframe on something that has such a negative connotation. So before we shift gears to really diving into the Sacred Creativity Retreat, I do want to ask a question that has kind of been percolating for a while. And that is the question of, are retreats, this kind of retreats, meant for and available to everyone? Or is there kind of a process by which you should, or not should, I hate that word, but like a process by which you would encourage people to evolve or, maybe reflect or shift things to go there? Because, I will say one thing. and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, which is, I think that there's absolutely something so beautiful about the fact that these mind shifting states are now available to us. They're a lot more common. People are talking about this. There are profound effects that can be so beneficial, and research does support that. But I guess I just wonder, and you are, as we talked about on the Nourish podcast, really a proponent of that kind of spiritual, what was the term that I wrote down? Spiritual transparency, right? Radical spiritual transparency. So this is something that is not foreign to you. But for people listening to this who are like, okay, I see it all over Instagram, people are talking about it. Like, is it meant for everybody?
I would say no. It's kind of funny because I'd be the first one to tell people they're not ready if they want to come to a retreat and they're not ready. And there's a whole interview process that happens beforehand to make sure that people are coming from the right reasons, and at the same time, there's so many modalities available to people to help them on their spiritual journeys that plant medicine isn't the only one available. I mean, for me, it actually started with yoga and breath work and meditation, and it's still a huge part of my life. So, don't go do a retreat because it's trendy, because you're seeing it all over Instagram, or you've watched How to Change Your Mind on Netflix. You need to do your research, and you need to feel that calling to craft the journey that is meaningful to you and important to you. But it also has risks. I mean, there's health risks, and I don't want to get into that because there's a lot of liability there. But people should do their research. There's counterindications of people who have certain conditions should not go do plant medicine retreats, and so. It's not for everyone. It's not for everyone, but at the same time, a lot of people can do it. But you need to feel that calling inside, not because somebody told you that you need to do it, not because your significant other is going there and they want to drag you along. Like, this is something it's a really meaningful, important journey where you need to be willing to put in the work before, during, and especially after the journey. It's like a traditional hero's journey. So, yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's so important from people who have had such positive experiences and who are as experienced in this space as you are, to really offer people up like a very holistic perspective on this journey and this path. So let's talk about the life cycle, because you alluded to it, that there's a process of preparation, then there's the retreat itself, and then there's what happens afterwards. So can you give us kind of like a high level overview of those stages, and then we can dive deeper into the actual retreat itself?
Yeah, I mean, I can actually use our retreats as an example, but for the preparation can start a couple of months before the retreat. In fact, I like to say it starts as soon as you've got the thought in your head of like, I'm going to sign up for this retreat, because as soon as you're starting to think that, the journey is starting for you. And so the question then is, how prepared do you want to be to make the most out of this experience? Because a lot of time you're down there in Peru for 2 weeks, maybe a week. And so you want to maximize that experience, and it's costing a lot. I mean, you could do it locally in the US, but it's still the same thing. You want to make the most out of this experience. So the preparation is all about how are you going to show up when the retreat starts. It's about cleaning your diet, maybe some habits or behaviors. It's also about making a little bit of sacrifice in my mind. I try to explain that to my guests. Is like, are there a few things that maybe are bad for you? I don't know, cheese, ice cream, or watching Netflix for 3 hours a night, that you want to start maybe cleaning out of your life to prepare for the retreat, because the retreat gives you an event and a purpose. And so it's also a great reason to start being maybe a little bit more disciplined, which helps with the mindset, which is critical on how you show up during those ceremonies. There's a whole set and setting, and the mindset is huge. There's dietary restrictions, medical. Like, if people get medicine that has counterindication with ayahuasca or other psychedelics, they need to like SSRIs, for example, or people who have ADHD and take certain medicines, like these need to be cleaned out of the system because there could be risk of negative interaction with the medicine. So there's a whole preparation process. There's also interviews that we conduct beforehand to help people set the intent of, like, why are you going down there? Like, what is your purpose? What are you trying to get out of it? And so we coach them through that process. And then there's other things we added, like a journey kit and things and I can talk about that later, but things to support them in their journey. So for us, it was start now. Why wait? Why wait until the retreat to be creative? Here's a professional harmonica, and I'll teach you remotely how to play it. And so we wanted to start your journey well beforehand, before the retreat. So that's the preparation. And then there's the actual retreat where, you're doing the work every day. So, we had meditation, we had art and music workshops, we had the actual ceremonies, and you eat a clean diet, you do some yoga. It's just a wonderful experience. And you have plenty of insights. Yeah, you have plenty of stuff that comes through the ceremonies. And then afterward comes the really hard work, which is what people call the integration. And the integration, we do follow-up meetings with people, like individual one-on-one meetings and group meetings. But people have to be willing to put in the work. And that's a really, really, really important thing that often, like, the experience with psychedelics is so big. It's like the mountain peak that when they come down, they don't realize they actually have to climb another mountain, which is the integration mountain. And a lot of time it's hard because you go back to your environment, you go back to your routines, your family and your friends still see you like they saw you before you left. And so there's a lot of reconciling that needs to happen. There's a lot of facing hard truth that needs to happen and to enact those insights. And so in my mind, this is the most important thing. And I'm happy to say that for all of our guests, they approached all those challenges afterward with very kind of a very level-headed, very grounded approach, which made me really happy.
So I think that's, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's super interesting to recognize that it really is a process. And I think that a lot of people kind of imagine this, myself included, as like a week and then you go back. But I love that you called out the preparation. And frankly, I'm just going to call that out as an incredible prompt for everybody, which is like, what is not serving you in your life today, to like really reflect on that. And I love that was part of the preparation that you had your group go through. So without going into a lot of detail on the people, because we can't share personal details, I would love to hear from you. I know you interviewed every single guest before they came. So what were some of the things that you were looking for? And maybe could you share a little bit about the qualities of the people that showed up? Because I think it'll be helpful for folks to see if they can relate to any of the people who ended up really benefiting.
Yeah, I was looking for people who actually resonated with our DNA and our team and our mission, because I wanted people who were willing to put in the work. And there's a lot of retreat centers that give people a lot of leeway, and they go make them do touristic things and all that while they're doing the retreat, and and people have fun, they do tourism, they do the retreats, they have some few insights and all that. But I wanted people who were like serious about, hey, they're going to do the workshops, they're going to show up. I mean, we had 2 art workshops, 2 music workshops, and it was important for me that people were showing up their whole selves to do the work. And so that's one of the traits I looked for, and the way we presented ourselves on our website automatically attracted people that were looking for that, because we made them jump through hoops right at the start of like, hey, you had to fill out this application. Give me your definition of creativity. Tell me why it's important to your life. Like, I wanted to know if we would be able to understand each other, because a lot of like that rapport you have between the facilitators, the healers, the team, and the people who attend is crucial.
And the whole group, right? Like,
and the whole group,
each other, right?
So that's the other huge thing, is like you want the energy of the group to work together. Like, there's some people I push back because they were criticizing the very things that people were coming to heal for. And so I'm like,
could you share an example, like, at a high level? I'm curious.
They were just making fun of certain patterns people would, go seek healing for, because they didn't feel like they needed it. And I'm like, well, this isn't going to work with our group. Like, we need to have a space where people can be vulnerable. Like, this is essential, a safe space where people can share deep trauma, things that have been really challenging for them, and being able to connect together is healing in and of itself. And so selecting that group is one of the most crucial things that we could do as the running the retreat. Because if you don't do that right, you can have really bad experiences. Like, we can have people like draining each other's energy, and really impacting the ability to heal. And this is also why we keep our retreats intentionally small, under 10 people. We'll probably stick maybe under 8 people, because the more people you add to the group, the more dynamics, the more the dynamics of the group get complex, and you're also increasing your risks and increasing the risks for your guests. So we screen for all that, and then we also try to understand their background, their trauma. Everybody had some type of trauma, everybody who joined us, and it didn't always come up in the interview. Sometimes it came up once we were at the retreat, where they actually didn't even realize themselves why they were truly there. Sometimes people will mask reasons behind other reasons. But we did a thorough interview, and they got to meet everyone on the team and everyone in the group before coming to the retreat. And we gave people the opportunity to, pull back at any point if they weren't comfortable, because we didn't want them to feel like looped in of like, hey, you've put a down deposit, now you can't leave if you don't feel comfortable. Like, I wanted everyone to be really comfortable.
I absolutely appreciate this kind of zooming in on the impact of the social connection and the social dynamics, and there is so much research supporting how expressing or going through this like vulnerable experience with others can be deeply healing. It can also be deeply traumatic. I mean, just to like throw an example out there, everybody think back to like middle school for a moment, and we can all, I think, acknowledge the trauma of what it's like to experience kind of vulnerability, be socially rejected. But I also just want to acknowledge the powerful healing of it, and just recognizing, and I think this is a missing link that we're now starting to talk about, just how loneliness and social isolation can actually perpetuate the cycles of, trauma, disease. And there are a lot of stats. Maybe we can deep link them in like the show notes afterwards, but there's so much research that shows, I think there's recent research that came out about how poor social relationships are associated with a 29% increased risk in heart disease and 32% increased risk of stroke. Yep. And so this is, of course, in like certain demographics, but it's just something that truly applies. And I love that you put such a deep focus on who is going to be there, so people have that opportunity to connect, because that can be so deeply healing.
Yeah. And in fact, this morning I just saw some research on LinkedIn that showed a lot of positive results with group ceremonies. It was for psilocybin mushrooms, but it's similar with ayahuasca. And I wouldn't do an ayahuasca ceremony all on my own. I think there's something very powerful in doing this with a group. And so that group healing, being able to be vulnerable. Also, the medicine helps you be more vulnerable the next day when we do group shares, is just so powerful. I mean, the people that went to our retreat, they're like family to each other now. Like they're connected with each other for life, and they really supported each other through the experiences.
It's powerful. So another really powerful part of the retreat, of course, were some of the activities that you facilitated there. And I know that music and art were, those were definitely focal points in the retreat, but you also mentioned neurofeedback and brain mapping. And I've actually never really heard of brain mapping. I mean, I have never heard of brain mapping. So let's just dive into that. What is that? Both of those things.
Yeah, this one was funny how that came about. It was a little bit of a leap of faith because I have this friend that I've known for a while, and he ended up in Peru, right next to the retreat center. We were operating, and he runs this company that does neurofeedback, brain mapping, and brain training. His name is Luke Jensen. He's been a guest on the podcast. So if people are interested, they can watch that. But it was a leap of faith because I'm like, I've never done that. I've never heard of retreats that have done that. But it would be so cool if we could actually baseline people's brainwaves before their experiences and after their experiences to actually see the impact of the workshops, the impact of the ayahuasca ceremonies that on people. And so, imagine if the results were like, no improvement. This is terrible. You just wasted your money.
Hey, you know what? It's just a data point. Like it's a data point. Brainwaves are just one part of the picture, right?
It's just a data point, but it was a leap of faith for that reason. And the one thing we did that not too many other retreat centers do is I wanted to make sure everybody could benefit from that. So I included that as part of everybody's journey. So everybody got basically a brain map, what we call a brain map, that was done before the ayahuasca ceremonies and the workshops. And they put the way it works is they put a cap on your head with about 20 different probes on it that covers the entire cerebral cortex brain. And they do what they call a QEEG, where they measure for 45 minutes with eyes open and eyes closed. They measure people's brain activity in all parts of the brain. And then after that, they have each person complete a psychological questionnaire that gets cross-referenced with the reading of the brain waves. And then the software they use basically summarizes everything that they've seen, the brain activity. And then my friend Luke and his team basically do a reading for each person explaining what they've seen. But what was fantastic is first, and this is obvious, but everybody's analysis was completely different, which is like we're all unique. It was completely different, but it was also very clear it was for that person because I was able to sit in on the reading for each person. And you're like, wow, this person has this characteristic. Wow, we noticed there's some trauma on this part of the brain. We noticed that this part of the brain is overactive, which, if you have a part of your brain that's overactive, it actually hurts the other part of your brain. And sometimes that can happen if you're like an overachiever type A and you work. What it does is it creates an imbalance in your brain. And so they were able to see all those things from the brain map beforehand and validate that with the conversation they had with people. So that was the first baseline brain map, which already that blew me away. I was like, wow. Oh, and there was also recommendations on like supplements people could take to address things they saw in the brainwave patterns and so on. So then we did the workshops, we did the ceremonies, I guided some meditations, and And then we reconvened with Luke's team called Neuro Enlightenment, and we did a second set of brain maps for everybody. So everybody went through the 45 minutes, eyes open, eyes closed. And wow, like I've got a full report that I need to publish at some point. But the big thing is everyone experienced a 30 to 50% improvement in brainwave normalization and brain plasticity. So brain plasticity is ability for the brain to create new connections, and brain normalization is kind of like aligning the brain waves so it's a more healthy pattern. 30 to 50% improvement for everyone. Luke said this was equivalent to about 5 to 6 months of brain training, and brain training is an exercise where they train people to have more healthy brain waves. And I'm learning more about that, so I can't go into more details than that. I'm actually in the process of getting more educated on all this because I was so blown away. And everybody got a little packet at the end. One of the most interesting cases, there was this lady. She had some head trauma earlier in her life that was located behind her right ear, if I remember, and they could see that in the initial baseline. During one of the ayahuasca ceremonies, and we actually, because of the baseline, we told the healer about it and asked him if he could help her with that. She told us that during the ceremony, she felt some pressure being released, like by the healer. Like the healer came next to her, and I don't know what he did. I wasn't I wasn't there when it was happening, but he came behind her, like, and I don't know, put some pressure behind her ear, and it was released. And when you go through the ceremonies and that happens, you don't know if you imagined it or if it was real. But you're like, yes, something happened. I feel different. And we actually saw it in the brain map. We could see that this pressure, that this trauma that she had in the baseline was no longer there. So, I mean, this is like, wow. This went beyond my expectations, and now I'm going to have brain mapping offered on all our retreats. And I'm going to do a lot more learning around it myself. But yeah, Luke and his team did wonderful work to be able to help us measure and show, quantify what people might have felt or imagined. And I guess every guest were like, wow. Like it's so valuable to be able to see a report that actually confirms some of the things I felt during those experiences.
Oh my gosh. Okay. First of all, I'm totally shooketh by that entire thing. Folks, this is like a live reaction because Sebastien and I did not discuss this beforehand, but that is just wild. To have actual quantifiable data to support this. But also I will make a comment on just how interesting is it, how we invalidate a lot of what we feel. And so I love this because I think it goes beyond just seeing the impact of this whole experience. I think it is such a validating thing for people to be like, wow, the things that I feel, I can now see are really real. What I feel in my heart, in my body, actually translates to the logic, the reasoning that I can understand it with. Yeah. And that is just so powerful. Frankly, that is just such a gift, I think, beyond the whole creative experience. That is so huge. I
got to say, yeah. And it's, if you go back to the States and try to get some brain mapping done, it's usually like an expensive service that's tagged on to therapy or other existing services. So it's actually out of price range for a lot of people. So being able to offer that high-end service as part of the retreat, which is high-end in and of itself, was a really big deal. The other advantage that it has is it provides additional safety and screening for us on the guest, because if they have a condition that through the brainwave we see, well, they're not a good candidate for the ceremony, maybe we give them less medicine, or we have them sit out of the ceremony. But that's really important in my mind. Like, this is as essential as, like, checking people's blood pressure when they go to the doctor. Like, you would, if I was a customer going to a retreat moving forward, I would expect all the retreats to offer brain mapping. It's such a vital tool to the tool set there.
Absolutely. Well, that is my bar now. So, and I'm pretty sure anybody listening to this is going to have the same bar, because once you go there, you just can't go back. It's a fact. I'm just throwing it out there. So I do want to shift gears actually to a more personal question for you here. And we touched on this at the beginning when we were talking about our multidimensionality, right? And the notion of how we show up in different scenarios in different ways, right? Where we're at work, we show up as the leader, the person that has it together. We're running the meetings, we're closing the sales, like whatever it is that happens there, right? And now you were in a really unique scenario, because in a way you were tapping into both sides at the same time, right? Where you're a facilitator here, you're a co-host, you are literally holding space for everybody else. But at the same time, you're also going through your own experiences. And as we talked about, like, a core theme in your life is to actually integrate these two parts of yourself. Like, how can you be, in a way, showing up as, the parent in the room to hold things together, but then also allow your own creativity to flow and to be present with people and open-hearted when it requires a lot of also planning and thinking and organizing. What was that experience like for you?
Well, there was so much there. I think what a lot of the guests don't realize when they go to a retreat like this is that the facilitators and the healers go through their own spiritual experiences, being of service to them and being there for them, and they also have to do integration afterward, just like the guests have to do integration afterward, and they also have their breakthroughs and insights. And the one thing that's important, though, is I expect all the healers and facilitators to also do their own work and deal with their own shit before the retreat as much as possible. Otherwise, that can create other problems. But even if you deal with your own shit and to do all your work, which I've been doing for many, many years, you still have epiphanies, you still have breakthroughs. And so being I was facilitator. I ran a ceremony there. I helped support several ceremonies. I ran workshops, and I was there for the guests like all the time. I was even there for them 2 days before the retreat and 2 days after the retreat, where I was their guide. So the whole experience was really being of service. It was really about giving myself, my whole self, to support them in their journey. And what I mean by my whole self is my whole attention, being in the moment with them, listening to them. That listening is so healing. But when people confide with you and they're like, "Hey, this just happened," like, you need to be present. You need your whole self to be present. When I ran the music workshops, I kind of had a breakthrough at one point. I was hiding breath work into teaching them harmonica, kind of doing a Mr. Miyagi thing. And I realized, I was like, oh, wow, like when I'm teaching them all this, I'm using this part of myself that has really grown in the last 7-8 years. Actually, no, now it's 11 years. In the last 11 years, through yoga, through meditation and all that. And I realized at that point, if I could teach them this with those last 11 years of my life, what could I do with the last 25 years? I'm turning 49 this year. So the last, 40 plus years of my life, how do I bring all this together to really help them? And that turned to that, insight on multidimensional authenticity.
Oh my gosh, this topic. I wanted to, this immediately brings up the question of this. Do you think it is possible to, quote, experience and show up in a way where you feel like you're being of service in non-retreat places, non-retreat experiences? Like, what would this look like at a Microsoft?
Oh,
Can it
well,
be done? I'm curious.
I think it can, but you have to, like, what the retreat did, at least for me, is help me feel um, how it helped me realize you can be that rock for people and you can support them in the storm. And it helped me understand that sometimes instead of looking inward at your own shit, working outward and helping people with their own shit is feels just so much more natural, and healing. But being able to do it in a way that's not driven by ego is really important. And that was like a really big thing for me, is like, I'm not a fireman, I'm not Superman, I'm not there for my ego. I'm there to support them in their journey, and I'm humbled by that experience of supporting them. And I think like that was like a huge breakthrough for me, to just feel that humility in service and see how to deepen that service in the process. And can it be done at a company like Microsoft? I think it can, but like you still have to harmonize this, I'd say, with different pressures to hit certain goals, and you have to be able to create that environment for people where they can be their whole selves. And I think that's part of being of service. Like if you're a leader or a manager, is helping people flourish, helping people get the nourishment that they need. Plugging in the Nourish podcast here.
I like it. Thank you. Shameless plug. But I truly, I love this. I mean, this is one of my favorite topics. And I think it's really interesting. And I'll just share like a personal note here of how I can relate to you sharing this. And I'm just so glad you shared this breakthrough, because it really validates for me a lot of the experiences that I've been having. I have never been part of a ceremony, but I'm a huge meditator, and you know that about me.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been trying to do, and this is why I also asked this question, is in those scenarios where I notice myself getting disconnected from my body, like high pressure meetings, that's usually the common thing, where I feel like I'm in a room and somebody else has the power in the room, like in the energetic power dynamic, like if you're meeting with an investor, let's say, or your boss's boss and you're presenting something, like there's this element where I'm experiencing, at least for me, fear, anxiety, pressure, as you mentioned it. And what I've been trying to do is in that moment, like rather than recoil into myself, what does it look like to lean in with like my heart wide open? And it's fascinating because as I hear you describing like showing up in service as part of this retreat, I'm like, wow, like what would it be like to approach life like this? Like, what would our corporate worlds, our businesses look like if this is how people led? And, I can speak through the couple of experiences through which I consciously did this. The anxiety disappears, the pressure disappears. And guess what? I perform just as well. But for some moment in time, I feel like I'm having a human connection, as opposed to a power struggle and a power argument. I think all type A's can kind of relate to this, where you're like, okay, will they invest? Will they not invest? Like, did I present well? Did I not present well? Like, how did I manipulate the situation to work to whatever outcome? It's like having that human experience. And it sounds like you were able to balance that at your retreat as you were leading and facilitating to release your ego. Like, yes, you were facilitating, but you were also deeply present. And that's just so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there was this moment, it was in the first ayahuasca ceremony, where the facilitators drink the ayahuasca as well. So we can all be kind of in the same headspace. But there was this moment where I had the choice. I was like, I just drank the brew. I'm starting to feel the effect. Everybody is starting to feel the effect. I can go inside and kind of recoil and work on my stuff. And I would get a little bit of anxiety if I did that, or at the time. But I was like, no, I'm gonna like go outward, just like exactly like you explained it. I'm actually gonna go outward and be there for people, open my heart, be of service. And it's not time for my stuff. It's not time to deal with my own stuff. It's time for me to be there for them. What was interesting is the outcome of that was, by being there for them, I indirectly dealt with my own stuff because I felt a lot better, and I grew in the process. And I've led ceremonies before, but these were very unique ceremonies for another reason: is everybody was putting in the hard work. So when you're a facilitator and you're running ceremonies, seeing people show up and put in the hard work is extremely rewarding, because you know they're invested in the process, you know they care, and that's important in life. Like if you're building something, and sometimes in the corporate world it's like, well, like, do people really care for what I'm building? But that was very unique from that perspective. Like, people were like so into it, they did everything, and it was magical, like what happened in those ceremonies, the breakthroughs, and what I saw in people, the changes I saw.
Sebastien, I could keep chatting with you, but I hate to break it to you, we are coming up on time pretty soon here. So I do want to throw this out there, because I know I'm not the only one that's wondering, are we having a 2023 retreat? What is the plan?
If there's enough interest, we might do one in the fall. Right now, the next one will be in spring 2024. We intentionally don't do too many of these because we're using the same team. We don't want to exhaust people. We also we're very selective on who can join, selective more to build the right group, like I explained, to ensure everybody has a great experience. And we put a lot of energy in crafting the experience. It's also exhausting. I mean, I had I was sleeping with 3 hours of sleep a night for several days when I was there. I didn't feel it, but it's an exhausting experience. So we want to make it count. We want to make it matter. And so the next one, spring 2024, though in the last few days I've gotten a lot of interest, so it could happen sooner.
And where can people find you?
Well, they can go to my personal website, which is the easiest one. There's always a link there. It's fouillade.com, FOOYAD.com.
So easy, by the way. Yeah, I had to practice that. I was like, oh, to my personal website. I know. That's what happens when you have a beautiful exotic name. Sorry, please repeat that.
Well, it's the phonetic. It's a phonetic spelling of my last name. So my last name would be even worse as a domain name. But it's FOOYAD.com. Or they can actually go to sacredcreativityretreat.com if they remember that. It's a mouthful, but it's actually, we own that domain name, so that will send them there as well.
Amazing. Well, Sebastien, it was such a joy for me to be a guest host. Such an incredible conversation. I learned so much, and I feel honored to have joined you here.
Thank you, Kasia. It was a pleasure to have you there. And again, people should check out your podcast. It's fantastic. The Nourish podcast. Wonderful guests, wonderful interviews. You're a fantastic host, and I'm so grateful you were able to be here today to help get those words out of me, because I've tried to write all this down, and I've been writing a book about it, and that's not digestible. So thank you so much for making this show. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, follow me on Instagram at Leadershipedelics, or stop by my website and say hi at fouillade.com. That's FOOYAD. There's a lot going on, and I'd love to hear from you all, the listeners that tune in every week. And if you have suggestions for future guests, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm there, and I'd love to get more guests on the show. Thank you. Have a great day.